Hello, everyone. Welcome to this talk. We are here to talk about how to bring customer-centric thinking into your daily work, especially if you are a project or product owner who's working on complex problems and faced with a very diverse stakeholder map, especially if people are coming from different functions. So how do you work in that space is something that I'm hoping to address in this conversation. A little bit about me. Very quickly, I have a bit of a versatile background. I started in marketing in Unilever, moved industries to Google, looked at figuring out how to sell more phones. And then for the past 6 years, I have been in product management with Amazon. Most recently, I'm now working in Amazon Netherlands, and I work on product managing the on site experience. All right, let's talk a little bit more about you. What I'm expecting is if you're a listener to this presentation, you would identify with this guy in the middle because you are someone who, on a daily basis, is either dealing with multifaceted problems on one hand, and on the other hand, you're working with a very matrix stakeholder setup where you have working across functions, across seniority, geographies, and not always are the incentives or the definition of what the problem is aligned with the way you are thinking about the problem. At the same time, you're not sure whether the solution that you have in mind is something that these stakeholders will also agree with. So, given this problem and you being stuck in between these two issues, how do you get out of it? What is the solution? And this is what I'm proposing. I think bringing the customer in the middle of the discussion is really the key. Customer centricity is the key to figuring out not only what is the right problem to define and work on, but also agreeing with your stakeholders on the right solution and subsequently what is the progress on that and how you are proceeding in that. What I'm hoping to give in this talk is some tips and tools on how to tackle that as you experience that on a daily basis in a very practical fashion. So let's get started. From a content point of view, I have actually divided out this talk into two big parts. The first part is more about defining what the problem is, and the second part is going to talk us through what should success look like. So in the first part of defining the problem, let's think about this for a second, right? You can change as many light bulbs as you want, but they're not going to light up till the time you are sure you haven't identified the right problem. I think real life or our everyday work life is very similar to that. Defining the problem is half the solution. And this really deserves your time and attention to think about what is it that the customer feels, what is it that the customer wants at the end of this project or product cycle. And this is where the centricity of bringing the problem closer to how the customers see it lies. So, the first part of the problem is what really is the problem? How do you even get down to the granularity of explaining what that problem is? And you do that in a way that you involve your different stakeholders who just, by the way, might not agree with the way you're defining it. So here's my suggestion. When you're defining the what of the problem statement, you focus on these three pillars. You observe, you look at what customers are doing today, you follow them on the way they would potentially complete a shopping journey. You look at what their phone experience is like, where your real estate is significantly smaller compared to a laptop, where the real estate is much bigger. You try to read through the emails that the customers might eventually see and check for simple confusion points or traps that you are laying inadvertently in front of the customer by complicating the issue too much. You then find something in your observation that you can measure. And this measurement, the way you propose the measurement, will help you define your area of focus. We will see some examples of it in just a second. But it is important to connect what you're measuring to what you're observing. I know this sounds pretty commonsensical, but you'll be surprised by the number of times this actually does not happen. And the third final figure is, how do you specify? So you've observed a particular customer problem, you figured out a way of measuring it. Have you really gone ahead and specified who the actual customer is? Are you doing everything to identify the end benefits of who will who will benefit if this problem is solved? So just think about that at a deeper level when you're looking at articulating what the problem is. So some examples, right? When you talk about observing what the customer problem is, look at it from the lens of discovery. How are customers finding this? Are they searching for it? Are they browsing? Are they doing a combination of things? Are they reading newsletters? What do you know that customers' eyes are falling on? How much time are they spending on things? Try and get a sense of what the customer frustration is. Is it truly that easy for your customers to find and buy that thing on the phone? Is the experience dramatically different across different surfaces? What really is the latency or the speed with which you are serving the customer? Because customer demands are always ahead of the curve, and you're almost always one step behind trying to understand how quickly do you want to serve this to customers. So are you sure that the experience you are creating, even if it is super rich, is taking too long to load? Is that additional time needed to load that particular beautiful, rich image really worth it or not worth it? Those are the kind of observations that I would encourage you to really look at it from a customer's lens, build a lot of empathy, and try and understand what exactly is the problem that you would like to focus on. That takes us to the second pillar. Assuming you've observed and figured out from the lens of discovery, customer frustration, or latency of the assets, whether you have that big problem in your product or project. How would you really measure it? Measuring these observations would look something like what I have laid out here. Big disclaimer, all the data that you see in this talk is purely for illustrative purposes, so please do not take it out of context or as the truth. Um, so measuring an observation of discovery frustration could sound something like this. 67% of customers found the product using search, but 52% of those bought using browse. So the way this measurement is articulated makes you choose and think, what part of this observation do you really want to measure and focus on? It sparks the right amount of debate, and it gets different perspectives to understand the complexity of the problem. So in this particular situation, the question you will think two times about is, should you focus on the search aspect of things, where customers are finding products predominantly using search, or rather should you focus your efforts on the conversion of browse, because that seems to have a lot better chance of getting you that final dollar? So there are two perspectives in which you can really measure what the customer problem could be and hence direct the conversation. Another example of frustration: cart abandonments is a good measurement for customer frustration, right? So the way you articulate that is, if cart abandonments are higher on mobile versus desktop for a particular product category, would different stakeholders across function agree that mobile is the key area of focus for all your products or projects going forward? Just something to get them interested in how you're linking the customer observation to the measurement of the same and highlighting how severe this particular issue is. Similarly, when you talk about latency observations, try and enumerate exactly what is it that you're uh, trying to amplify from a customer's problem perspective. So the fact that the banner takes zero point 0.4 seconds to load is not a problem in of itself, But the problem comes when you put in context the fact that on an average, a customer navigates away from a page in under 0.2 seconds. So that context and that comparison in the way you measure the observation really is what helps bring to life the problem. So, right, by this point, you've done the two parts of the piece, which is you have done the observation, you have brought the customer in the room, and you have figured out where is it that things are breaking, if they're breaking in discovery, if they're breaking in frustration, or they're breaking in latency. And then you've gone ahead and also measured or found a way of articulating that measurement that sparks the right debate by putting things in context for that metric. There is a third thing left for you to do, which is to specify. So you need to start getting clearer around who ultimately benefits if this problem that you have observed and measured gets solved. Is it genuinely the end customer? So people who are coming to your site or trying to engage with your product, and eventually being able to buy things or find things? Or is it another stakeholder? It could be an engineering team where the project that you're leading, if you were to solve that problem for them, would lead to an immediate improvement in the maintenance cost. Or indeed, is it the business? So this is a clear GMS opportunity or a revenue opportunity which is being left on the table that would be capitalized if your product or project comes to fruition. So ultimately, when you're talking about what the problem statement is, you do need to look at it from three lenses of observing the customer, being able to measure that customer observation, and finally specify who is your customer in that particular regard. So let's say you have cleared the first hurdle, which is of defining what the problem is and getting your stakeholders to agree with you that yes, this is a problem because it's quantifiable, it's measurable, you're clear on the end customer who benefits from it. What are the kind of tips and tricks you can use to articulate the problem? What should really you be thinking about? So when you're getting down to the business of the how, as in crafting the problem statement itself, I would encourage you to think about these three things. One, a mapping exercise. Map out every individual discovery point for your customers. How would customers find this? What are the different screens that they look at? How often do they look at these screens? Which part of the screen is it that the customer attention needs to be focused on but is not? Think about what their frustrations could be. When you move from one category to the other category, is the transition seamless? Is it easy for the customer to always find the things they want, be able to convert it, be able to pay for it? What is the flow of information that they are receiving from you? Is communication coming from your marketing campaigns or from your site experience simple enough for the customer to understand? Finally, think about taking inputs from technical teams or other related stakeholders for that matter on latency metrics or on other specific metrics for your project. The kind of processes that can help you define these statements in the how aspect is you could do a design sprint. There's plenty of material online, so I will not get into details of what exactly the design sprint is or how to do it. But here I will just lay out a flavor of the different tools, tactics that your team could deploy or you yourself as a product owner could get into the details of to understand. So getting back to the problem statement articulation, how you articulate the problem could be by using a design sprint and inviting your different stakeholders to that and guiding the process of seeing the entire product or process or project from the customer's eye end to end, mapping out the discovery points, mapping out frustrations, mapping out specifics like latency. You could also do something that we at Amazon call walk the store. So you could look at what the site looks like and try and mimic what a customer's journey is going to be. So look at the different points where you would seek information from the site. Is that information resting in the right places? Is this something you would look at on a product information level, or is this something you would expect on a search filter basis? You could also, and this is where things become really qualitative and very rich, look at user stories, anecdotes, try and pull information from what the customers are trying to tell you. Try and group these user stories into buckets that make sense and are relevant to certain aspects of your project. And then, of course, cannot emphasize enough the importance of analytics, customer behavioral data, traffic data, engagement information, split by specificity that is available to your product or project teams. The key takeaway here really is use customer problem identification as an alignment point across functions, because this is one thing that all the different stakeholders can genuinely understand. How do you work backwards from what really is the customer problem is something that you can definitively use across different functions to get them to align with you on the right problem to solve together. With that, we come to the second part of the talk, which is about assuming that you have managed to define the problem. How do you define success? And this is something I think a lot of product managers would really resonate with. Often, the problem you have is not that you have only good news or only bad news, is the fact that in the results of your testing, experimentation, almost always you have a mix of information, right? You don't have one way of looking at things, you have multiple ways of looking at things. And how do you make sense of, was it really a success or not? So what really is success? This is really important, much like how we covered in the problem setup, why it is important to spend time on defining the problem itself, because by putting the customer in the center, you have a higher chance of getting your stakeholders to agree with you on the problem definition. In a similar vein, being able to define success upfront with your stakeholders is something that will set you up for a completed project or product. So when you're getting down to defining what success means, there are certain traps you need to look out for. If you define your project success too narrowly, almost always you will end up with two conclusions. Either the output is not going to be optimum enough or big enough for it to have significant value, or um, it's not something that would generally be seen as a success. So, what are the different lenses you can use when you're looking at understanding success definition? You could look at what does it mean from a controllable point of view on what input succeeded or not. So, getting clarity on the share of inputs that you were able to control and you were able to turn from a red to a green is valuable. Being able to measure change in observable customer behavior, perhaps in the ideal case linked to the customer problem articulation itself, will be fantastic. Looking at if your initiated action led to a process improvement, even if it did not lead to certain, let's say, desired output KPIs, is also a positive success definition. Some details or examples around this. As a controllable input, what we call controllable should be an action or a metric which can be explained with the presence of effort, or at least, at the very least, a correlation with it. So, an articulation of what a controllable input could potentially look like would be: we audited top products that contribute to majority of defects. We found certain number of root causes. We are now checking for actions, addressing these, and we'll dedicate resources to scale once the solution is found. So this is pretty much capturing what is it that you individually are doing in the process, in the project, in the product, which is controllable, which is actionable, because perhaps the problem you're working on is so ambiguous that being able to tackle the whole problem just by yourself is simply not possible. How are you measuring the change and how are you talking about it to your stakeholders? Identify the customer behavior, and ideally, this should already have been done at the problem statement setup point of view. Check what is that customer behavior and see if it is changing. Now, I'm not saying increasing from a very clear standpoint that sometimes increase in of itself is not informative enough. So you need to look at what is the direction that this change is taking. Is if one thing is improving, what is degrading, and you look at that entire picture together and you see whether the positive change is a consistent positive change. So you looking for trends is absolutely important in order to, let's say, reinstate that that change is definitively the outcome of the action that you have introduced. So an articulation of a success in this regard would look something like, after the rollout of this experience, we are seeing customers spending more time considering alternative products. And then here you insert exactly what is the behavior change. In this particular case, it could be a click-through rate. And then you also add what is the range of that change in a particular time period. In this instance, it's 6 consecutive weeks. And then finally, another definition of success could be, what is the process improvement that you managed to deliver? So state how the change or the solution you proposed improved existing processes. Did it lead to improved productivity? Could it have led to a reduction in cost, generating savings for the business? So think about what is the positive of the action that you have rolled out. Map it out to the last mile detail to look at things from every perceivable lens. An articulation of process improvement could sound like an increase in automation led to 2 times improvement in processing times, which was X amount of hours and week times saved. Again, just a disclaimer, all data used in this presentation is purely for illustrative purposes, so please do not tie it back to any particular project or company. Fine, we are at the last end of this talk. So we have taken the trouble so far for finding the problem, defining it in a customer-centric fashion. We've managed to get stakeholder buy-in in articulating that problem statement. We have now moved on to defining or thinking about what the success criteria could be. We have kept it broad. We've looked at it from different angles. Now we are down to the brass tacks of how do we define the success? What are the tools that you can use to get this going? And when you're looking at that, maybe think of it these 3 very simple elements that you should include whenever you're talking about what success means to your product or project. So of course, being able to align on the success metrics is important, but make sure that you're not keeping it super narrow. Ensure that there is a wide range of metrics or potential parameters which you can track and monitor in order to truly understand what are the different facets this particular experience is triggering. If you feel success metrics in of themselves are not sufficient and your project or product is ambiguous to start off with, in the sense your product is so ambiguous that you might not already know what success looks like, at the very least, you should be able to define what the path forward looks like. So what are the signposts or the milestones that you can use or you can define that helps you understand and your stakeholders align on the product moving definitively from one phase to the other? Make sure that you're defining what the acceptance criteria is. This is particularly important whenever you're doing new development. If you do not align with your technical teams, particularly in understanding what is acceptance, you might end up with a product or an outcome that is in fact not acceptable. And this gets down to defining specificity of what you're expecting. So you don't have to say, for example, that the output of this product, or let's take an example of a customer facing tool that you're creating, which will sit on your site. It's not important to have the acceptance criteria specified so much that the development teams have zero birth of navigating uncertainty, but you do need to talk about how this tool will function. So do you want this tool to be working 24 hours, or do you want this tool only to work when the site hits a certain level of traffic? What other acceptance criteria can you think of? It should be able to input text as well as alphanumeric information. Should it only be working on desktop, or should it be working on all potential services? So I think being able to anticipate what the outcome would look like and setting some criteria to that outcome will definitely help your technical teams work better in sync with what you have in mind. And then finally, I cannot emphasize the need for this enough. Spend time crafting requirements. Requirements are the holy grail of defining the what from a product perspective, and pay attention to what you're requesting from your different teams, because uh, there can be differences in the way they interpret your information. So make sure you're spending enough time vetting out what you mean versus what you have said with your partners and stakeholders, to make sure that everybody has the same level of information and is aligned with your concept of what the product is. That is really it. That's all I had to share today. I hope this was useful, and hope you have a great day ahead. Thank you very much.